Hi, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Plymouth. My name is Derek Brindisi. I'm your host and your town manager. This afternoon, we have a special guest with us, Selectman Kevin Canty, also the Vice Chair of the Select Board. Congratulations, Mr. Canty.
Thank you, Derek.
So before we begin, just I try to give folks a background. We started this show a little over a year ago, primarily to talk about all the great things that are happening in town. As you know, there's a lot of great things that our town officials do day in and day out. So I like to tell that story. But also, as you all know, on social media, they don't always have the facts. Mm-hmm. So we also use this forum to talk about, trying to straighten out some of the misinformation that's out there. So I think today we're going to focus on some of the great things that have happened over the past couple of weeks. In particular, the most recent trip to Shichigahama, I'd love to talk to you about.
Sure.
But before we get there, I know many people in the community already know you, especially during your time on A&F. But if you don't mind, if you could just kind of give the folks in the community a little bit of a background. I know you were born and raised here in town.
Yes, it's been an honor to be elected to the Select Board. I was elected this past May. Prior to that, I was on the Advisory and Finance Committee for 9 years. I was its chair for the previous 4 years through the pandemic. So through that experience, I had detailed knowledge of the workings of Plymouth's government, because every article that has to go before town meeting goes before the Advisory and Finance Committee. But it was, I thought, time that I could bring my services to the Select Board, and I was privileged to be elected by the community. And it's been an experience so far. It's been very enjoyable, and I'm looking forward to the next 2 and almost 3 years at this point left of the term.
Well, as you know, we have a lot of work ahead of us.
We
Fall
sure do.
town meeting is coming up.
We do.
We'll be setting our goals probably hopefully in the next few weeks. So,
Yeah.
The summertime can certainly seem like a little bit of a lull.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing year-end stuff on the finance department.
Right.
We're preparing for the new fiscal year. But come September 1st, Labor Day, things really start to ramp up at that point.
Yeah, and I remember from FinCom that it was also kind of a lull for us, because as you said, finance is busy doing the background work that makes everything actually work and communicating with DOR. Town meeting is coming up. The warrant just closed the other day. FinCom's going to start hearing articles. We'll start hearing articles as the Select Board as well, and then the caucuses will start happening, and everything will start taking off from there.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and the draft warrant will be released, I think, the end of this week. And I talked to Brad Brothers, our assistant town manager, and we have, I would say, a little over 30 articles. That includes the 9 CPC articles. So again, a lot of work is ahead of us. The board will, hear them first, and as you pointed out, and then move on to A&F.
Yeah, and prior to COVID, the fall town meeting was usually about 30 articles. It was shorter during COVID because people, particularly in 2020, 2021, when things were changing all the time, and it sort of retracted a bit for an extended period there. But it looks like more and more things are going back to normal, or at least the new normal, now that we've also incorporated Zoom to so many of these things.
Right, and I was just going to say, and we'll be on round 2 of our hybrid town meeting. So
yeah.
All good things to come. We learned a lot in April, and I think we'll just build upon that.
Right.
So, Kevin, you and I had the great opportunity and an unbelievable experience to have gone to Shichigahama, Japan last week, and along with many others, and we'll talk about them in a few minutes. So, what was your first impressions of going to Shichigahama, our sister city?
Well, it was a fascinating experience. It was a long travel. We had a 13-hour plane ride, 5-hour bus ride. So the first day was pretty much just travel, getting in very late at night. 10 students joined us, and they got an opportunity to briefly be introduced in person to their host families. Then we just went back to the hotel, and we didn't really start things in earnest until day 2. But taking a tour of Shichigahama and the tours of Matsushima and Sendai, I think the most striking was how much of their lives were impacted by the tsunami in 2011. Even just driving around town, you'd see buildings would have markers of, this second floor window is how high the wave went on March 11th, 2011. taking a tour of that elementary school and seeing all those houses and businesses that had been destroyed, that park that was over a former residential area that they had to move people, and they didn't feel comfortable putting commercial businesses there because of how many people had lost their homes, how many people had died, and they instead made it a public park and a playground. So, you know, it's 12 years on since the tsunami at this point, but even our going away part sort of event, they had those school children singing songs about moving on from the tsunami and rebuilding, and some of those kids weren't even alive for the event because they were too young.
Right.
But it's still affecting their lives day to day. But they're still there. They're resilient, you know, and they're moving forward.
I was moved when we went to the school. When I didn't know what to expect going to Shichigahama. You know, you always hear about this sister city relationship, and it's been 33 years and continues to grow. And you hear a lot of stories of folks that have come back, and quite frankly, and I said this to the department heads when I met with them on yesterday, that you will never appreciate the sister city relationship until you actually go to Japan.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, I'm delighted that I had the opportunity. But to your point about touring the areas that were devastated by the tsunami, you know, I don't know how you felt, but watching the video of just the school, and it looked like it was in the middle of an ocean.
Yeah.
I mean, that video was just moving as far as like recognizing the devastation that tsunami caused. So, you know, we had the opportunity to tour that area. We had one day we spent kind of learning more about the culture.
Right.
And so I went to some of the temples. And it was interesting how we always talk about how Plymouth is the oldest colony in the U.S. at 400 plus years. And they were showing us temples that were older than that.
Right. Yeah, we walked through a gate to a 400-year temple, and the gate was 800 years old.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So it's stunning the length of time that some of those things have been here, and the history that's there, and the traditions that are such a big part of their lives, you know, to this day. And the kindness of the people over there was stunning too, from the people that were working with us to the people we were meeting at these events to just, you know, people on the street and in the stores. Just a wonderful place.
People were amazing. They were gracious. We didn't need anything, I think, when we were there. And, you know, I kind of felt bad because, you know, they were so accommodating that, you know, if your glass of water is half full, they were filling up for you. So, you know, we had the chance again to see the devastated areas by the tsunami. We had one day I call like kind of a culture day, learn about the Japanese culture, which is a great day. We made bracelets at one of the temples that day. It was a great experience, and just getting to, you know, meet the mayor and the chairman of their council and understand how their government operates. And I think one thing that I learned was that we're not as different as I would have thought.
Yeah. When we had that education summit on the last full day, and the concerns that they had for their students and their next generation was the same that we have here in Plymouth, even though we speak a different language, have a different culture and customs, and we live on the other side of the earth. It's the same, you know, concerns about your kids and about the future of your community.
And I think oftentimes we look at other nations and try to aspire to be more like them, or to kind of follow their lead, maybe their best practices. And I think what I learned from that education was that, you know, they're still trying to figure out how they can provide good education and a career path for their students. And we're doing the same, dealing with the challenges of social media and then what all that brings, and, you know, students that are more disadvantaged than others. And, you know, it was more of an exchange of ideas, but nobody had the right answer.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was, you know, that was amazing to me, that we were more just having a conversation and trying to support each other versus you know, one lead the other.
Right. Yeah. It was very and particularly the dedication of the people that work in their town government, you know, in running that and looking for answers to help their students, and, you know, stories about the current mayor there was in a different position at the time of the tsunami, working at the town, and he was like sleeping under his desk for 40 days to make sure that everything his initial response was as efficient as it could be, and they sort of de-escalated from there to give people the basic needs that they had. So from all the way back there to the present day, they're very dedicated, hardworking folks that are doing a lot for their community, and they certainly were waiting on us hand and foot for those 7 days.
And we'll have to repay that favor. So leaning forward 1 year, they will arrive here as a delegation, correct, next summer?
Yeah, and it's still being discussed if they're going to come the same time or they might come at a slightly different time in the year, and there's different schools of thought on the positives and negatives of shifting them to maybe October as opposed to August. But, rising to the level of what they did for us is going to be in and of itself a challenge, regardless of what time of year they come.
Right. They absolutely did do that. And, I know you mentioned it earlier, but we had 10 students from our school system who had the opportunity to spend 5 days with host families.
Yeah.
And in turn, we'll do the same next year. So I would imagine we'll be taking in about 10 students from Shichigahama, and they will reside with our families here in Plymouth.
Right.
So that's a great exchange. And, I tell a lot of people about my experience there, and as having only been, and I'm talking about the students now, been with these families for 5 days, on the last day, it was like they were one family. There was a lot of hugging and some little upsetness to see, our students leave on the bus that morning.
Yeah.
And a lot of the children got to know them in short 5 days and really just kind of, grew together very, very quickly.
Yeah, and we had some events. We were mostly separate from the kids because they were with their host families and doing other things. But we did have a couple of events where we were with our students, and at some of those they had members of the host family with them, and they were playing around like they were cousins or brother and sister.
Right.
So they bonded very quickly. So it was great to see.
And again, it'll be great. What I'm looking forward to next year when they come is I feel like I have a bunch of friends I've already made. So, we'll be reunited in a year from now, and we'll show them, all things that are great about Plymouth, and show them our history, our culture, and much like they did for us when they took us to Sendai for a Major League Baseball game, hopefully we can return the favor and take them to a Major League Baseball game here as well.
Yes, I know they'd be very interested in seeing that. Yeah,
we'll have to send some of these videos along to PAC TV to post some of the clips from the baseball game, which is very different than going to a Major League game, I think, here. I find it more exciting going to a Japanese baseball game.
Yeah, the fans are much more engaged, almost like watching like a soccer game in Europe, But
that's a good point.
So it's just, whereas here, it's mostly just watching, eating hot dogs. Then you got the seventh inning stretch, but beyond and screaming at Sweet Caroline. But,
This is true.
There they were pretty much ripping and roaring the entire time.
They
had chants for individual players. Yeah.
They were good.
They had competing fan sections for the home team and the visiting team, so they got a whole system over there.
Yeah, no, it was fun to be there, and having not partaked in the Japanese cuisine in the baseball game, I did eat a Japanese hot dog and had their French fries. So I tried to live, stay true to my roots of going to a Major League Baseball game and having hot dogs and French fries.
Right. I had fried octopus dumplings, so I branched out a little bit, but I still had the French fries. So.
Good for you. Good for you. So that was great. And then Luis Pisano and Kim Savory, both from school committee, attended us. They were part of this, what they call VIP delegation, as you know. Kim Savory did a great job representing the town, and she, as you can recall, delivered all the welcoming messages and the closing messages on behalf of the town. So we appreciate her kind of leading the way for us rookies joining.
Yeah, and because she had been there 10 years ago, and her first time was shortly after the tsunami, so I know it was good for her to see the progress that they'd made.
True. Yeah.
In that time. But and then we had the two teachers that were the chaperones, so it was 16 people was a good group.
Right. Yep. JC and Jackie, the two teachers from the public schools, and so
Yeah.
they had to stay with host families as well. But I think they had an amazing experience after seeing some of the things that they were able to experience.
Yes.
As well. So
Yeah.
good for them. So good. So we'll talk more about Japan. I think in other segments. I heard a rumor that PacTV's going to do a big segment with students down the road. So more to come on that. So just shifting gears just a little bit. When you were running your campaign, I'm sure you heard a lot of feedback from town residents of things that they'd want to see, maybe some changes that they would like to see new selectmen push forward. And I know that you certainly have some ideas and some priorities. Can you talk a little bit about what you think is going to happen, at least in your viewpoint, over the next 12 months?
Yeah, so I ran in favor of smart and balanced development, balancing affordable housing, conservation, economic development in terms of commercial development as well as strategic placement of residential development. We've already started talking as the select board and prioritizing affordable housing. That's come out at several meetings and is a continuing conversation because affordable housing is not just a vital service to residents, but not having enough affordable housing stock makes the town vulnerable to 40B projects that override local zoning. And that means that the options of Plymouth get taken away from us if we don't take charge of this. So it's really important that we get a handle on that and start providing that service. And I'm glad that we've already started making strides in that. Talking to local businesses about what's working for them, what's not working, so that we can both keep current businesses as well as try to attract more and increase our commercial tax base and reduce the burden on residential taxpayers. And then talking about things like a land bank, so we can, if we own the land, we can control the land. And there are other land banks in Massachusetts and others in the nation that exist that allow municipal acquisition of land for a variety of purposes. And I think Plymouth is not at build out despite its 400-year history. So it would be beneficial for us to have something like a land bank in place where the town could acquire land to decide how the town wants to use it. Because right now, if private folks buy land or own land, they can, with Massachusetts property laws, they can do a lot. And there's very little that the select board, the planning board, or other or town meeting can do about that. But if we own the land, we can control the land and the narrative with that land and have the Plymouth that we all want to have. So that's something that I'm very interested in. And I think over the next 12 months, you're going to start seeing the beginning of that process to put Plymouth on the map with having its own land bank, hopefully.
Speaking of the land bank, and I know that we have been actively having conversations with Holtec and trying to come to some agreement. This land bank, and I know one of the big priorities for the select board is to try to secure down the road at some point the 1,500 acres that Holtec controls.
Yeah.
Would this land bank assist in trying to acquire that property, do you think?
Yeah, so it looks like that piece of property, we're estimating it's probably like $35 to $50 million in today's money if it were to go on the market right now. If we started the land bank process, it would require special legislation. So if we did it today, it'd probably still take about 2 years to go through the legislature and actually become law.
Right.
Then we could start acquiring money into that fund. But you could also do what like the CPA does, which is you could borrow. So you wouldn't necessarily need to have that kind of money yet. But if you can prove a revenue stream, you could prioritize it for that purpose if that's what we wanted to do. So yeah, it definitely would help with the 1,500 acres. And I think that 1,500 acres, its size and its location makes it a chief priority for the town in terms of controlling a big part of Plymouth's future, particularly in the Chiltonville area. But I think it's also, the land bank will serve us throughout town, know. So it's good to focus it on it for that, and it's a big part of that conversation. But it'll serve us well, regardless of what happens with those 1,500 acres.
Right, and you mentioned the expansion of commercial development, and it's just staying on the Holtec conversation for a minute. I mean, there's an area of that land that I think a lot of folks said is prime for commercial or retail development, while there is like a large percentage of that property that should be preserved, right?
Yes.
So, and I think that's the balance that, we can't preserve everything, but let's look at land that's being underutilized and think about developing plans,
Right.
master plans in particular, for certain key locations where we could really build out some commercial space.
Right, and the good thing about something like a land bank, or just buying, if we weren't able to buy that land through any other method, whether that be the nuclear mitigation fund or whether that be grants and applications that we could get through other things, having the land means we could have a conversation about what we as a town want to do about it. So it wouldn't necessarily be what the 5 members of the select board want to do, or the members of the planning board or town management. We could all be involved in that process. But if somebody else, a private developer or group, buys it, then we're not in that process at all, other than the minimal we can do with zoning regulations. So, I think there's been a lot of conversations about, some people do want all of it preserved, but most people seem to agree that there's a big chunk we want preserved because it is a great piece of property as is. But then there could be some economic development that could be leveraged to grow, biotech sciences, earth sciences, environmental science related topics. That could be a benefit not just to our commercial tax base, but to Plymouth and the overall area communities as well, in terms of moving Plymouth forward, sort of similar like Woods Hole.
Well, it's interesting because I think what you're saying in summary is that we want to control the land, because if we can control the land, then we can dictate, through a community engaged process, what the best use for that property is, right?
Exactly.
Versus, and I don't want to bring it up because I know it's a sensitive issue, but Boston South and their acquisition of the 100 acres, the woodlot, 100 acres of the woodlot, and they originally had talked about a racetrack. They've come off of that. So in that situation, we don't control the property. So the best we can do is work with them, with them as a developer, and help guide them as to what we think would be the best use for the property. But at the end of the day, if it's an allowed use, they can go ahead and slate that.
Right, and since you said racetrack, I think as an elected official, I'm legally obligated to express that I'm against a racetrack in Plymouth.
Okay.
But yeah, the thing with the racetrack proposal and anything with Boston South as an example is we're on the outside looking in at that. We don't have any control. The same thing when often the select board or the planning board will be like, why are you guys letting this development over there happen or that happen? Well, we're not. It's that we don't own that land, and there's very little we can control. So the thing with the land bank and the Holtec property is it's a two-step process. First is acquisition of the land through a land bank or through other means, and then second would be, what are we going to do with the land?
Gotcha.
So even if you're somebody out there that disagrees with what we're talking about for possible uses for it, I think we should all be able to agree that getting Plymouth to control that land is a necessary first step, and then we can have that conversation about what to actually do with it. If we don't do that first step, the second step is going to be done by somebody else that we're going to have very little influence over.
Right.
And that's not good for Plymouth.
No, you're right. And just so I'm clear, so people, just because I brought up racetrack, Boston South is not pursuing a racetrack.
Right.
I want to say it again, they are not pursuing a racetrack. They will come down the road at some point in the future after they execute a lease agreement with the county commissioners. They'll come back to the town and work with us on some type of development.
Yes.
And I've heard a lot of things, everything from life sciences. I've heard a potential golf up there. So they are actively pursuing the best use, knowing that they need to work with town officials if they want to make this to be a successful project. So we're looking forward to that project, because that could, depending on what type of commercial use is at that project, it could help mitigate these taxes that continue to climb each and every year by placing proper commercial use for that space over there. So again, looking forward to what they come up with in the next 6 to 7 months.
Yes. Yeah.
So you just anything else? We're thinking probably the end of August. We're going to hold our workshop that we started last year, and this is our workshop for the select board to work with the town administration on setting goals and priorities for, in this case, FY24. We did that last year, and I'm just interested in. We have about a few minutes left. From the outside looking in, how did you think that process worked last year? And as advice to me, what can we do differently to make it better?
Well, I think one thing that we need to do better is communicate the message more consistently throughout all levels. So it's not just this past year, but historically, I think from my time on the FinCom, the select board would often start an initiative and set it out there, and then just sort of back away and let it play out through the process. I think it would be a better process if, when the select board or when town departments or divisions want to do something, they shepherd it all the way from the idea to the hearings in front of the Advisory and Finance Committee to the precinct caucuses to town meeting floor. And then, answering questions, managing that narrative, and in terms of, because like as you said at the beginning, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I think that's because there can be sometimes a vacuum if people just throw something out there and then step back, because people will innocently misunderstand something, pass that misunderstanding off to somebody else in conversation, and then that sort of takes on a life of its own. But if we, come up with a good idea and then we shepherd that idea throughout, then more people will see why it's a good idea, and we'll get more direct back and forth feedback on whether it is a good idea or not in the event that we don't have a great idea.
Yeah, so a couple of things with that. I think what I'm hearing you say is that, when we have, say, 2 dozen, 3 dozen goals, then maybe we shouldn't just state the goal, but we should lay out all the different tasks in order to achieve that goal, right? So folks can see where we are. So say it was a land acquisition, a purchase and sale agreement is part of that, a closing date is part of that. Right. So we could be having some type of document where folks can see where we stand with each one of those goals.
Right.
I can tell you, though, to your point about just throwing out an idea or having a small conversation and then it taking on a life of its own, is this conversation of engaging the owner of the full sale. I don't know if you heard, but we asked if he'd be willing to sell the property to the town, and then that took off, and next thing you know, we're putting a bathhouse there, we're putting a parking lot there. None of that is the case, but this is what happens when a stated idea isn't followed through.
Correct.
Right. So
Correct.
So I think that's something that we should look back after we set those goals and those priorities. Think about a way in which we could have deliverables along the way, so folks could watch the progress that's made and they can see what interval we're at. And some of them, there'll be no progress just because we can't gain traction. Oftentimes with some of these goals, we just can't gain traction on.
Right, and sometimes a goal takes longer to achieve than you wish it would,
right.
or you have to modify the goal midway through because it's not going to work, or some frustration of purpose comes up. But being clear and transparent on all that throughout the steps, I think, would pay dividends, both in terms of the output and the ultimate objective, but also in terms of public trust as well.
Well, unfortunately, this is the end of the show. It went by extremely fast, and I want folks to be aware of that. If once we set these goals and priorities, I think towards the end of August, we'll put this on the town website at www.plymouth-ma.gov. That's where you can get more information. You can sign up for alerts and for other media messages from the town, and we'll continue to provide as much information as possible during the course of the year, as Selectman Canty pointed out. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon.